All right, welcome to this week's lecture. I'm excited to see what you have chosen for your topics in this class. And now we're going to move this week through these next series of submissions from a general topic area to a position. So, in order to distinguish what those are, I want to start with these first two claims here at the top of this Google Doc. So, first, something being a claim does not itself mean that it's an argument. If I claim something to be the case, either my audience immediately accepts it, so we have no disagreement, so there's no argument happening, or if I make a claim, if I just say something like, Billie Eilish is the greatest recording artist of all time, and I don't give any evidence to support that, I'm not really giving an argument. I'm just maybe stating my opinion. That's a claim, but it's not yet an argument. So arguments are claims that are supported by evidence and or reasoning. So you're going to make lots of claims in your speech, but in order for them to be argumentative, you're going to have to support them in some way because you're imagining an audience who needs to see some support for these claims. They might not yet care about them, might not yet understand them, they may not yet believe them. So the CUB still applies here. But also, positions are propositions. So far we've been talking about topic areas. I'm going to talk here a little bit about self-driving cars. You might have talked about abortion, or maybe you talked about adopting rescue dogs or something like that. These are topic areas where, as you were able to show in your topic selection videos, there are a number of controversies that might be related to a general topic. And topic areas are not sentences. They're just names or tags for lots of different things that are happening in a pretty vague way. In order to make things more precise now, we want to be able to figure out what our position is by actually having a proposition. And so Stasis, which I'm about to give you an introduction to, will help organize the various claims that are happening in a controversy and help you to determine at what point you might need to argue in order to have a position in the controversy that you are arguing on. So first, what's stasis? Stasis is really an ancient concept. It comes from ancient Greco-Roman rhetoric, and this is still being used today. I know that many writing centers at universities will talk about stasis. You can find stuff about stasis online that's like this. I'm going to give you a slightly different view of what it is from what you might find online, but it's similar. It's coming from the same thing. Here we're thinking about it more from the point of view of producing arguments rather than just analyzing them, but it can be used for both of these purposes. And so in the classical rhetorical tradition, stasis was utilized in order to determine what needed to be said in a particular controversy or what kind of controversy we were in. And they recognized they were more than four, but four main kinds of disagreements that lead to different kinds of positions someone might take in a controversy. So you can hear in the idea of it being static, stasis means something like not moving. It's as if two different wrestlers are coming together and there's that point where they are not moving. They're in a hold together. That's kind of what stasis looks at. It looks at the point in a controversy where one claim meets another one. There's a claim and a counterclaim. So when you're imagining your own claims, you want to think about whether your claims have counterclaims. If they don't, then they're really not the thing that you're arguing in the controversy. They might be support, they might be used as reasoning or evidence for another argument, but they're not the claim that you're arguing. They're not in stasis, meaning you're not imagining anyone arguing against you at that point. So stasis wants us to identify those points. And so we'll go through the four different points here using a pretty traditional example that kind of imagines something like a court case, but not a court case we would recognize. These arguments wouldn't work in a modern court, but that's not really the point. So the first one is conjecture or fact. This is asking, what are the facts? This is a question of disagreement about what really happened in the past or what's likely to happen in the future, in the past or present, I guess, for what has happened. Might also be present still. So here the very simple example is you hit me. Maybe you're having a fight with your sibling and they say, no, I didn't. So the disagreement here is whether something happened or not. You might think about in your own controversy whether there are disagreements based on the things that you've already read, where people just really disagree about whether something is the case, whether some historical event happened or not, whether statistical information that's being used by one party is valid or something like that. So these are conjectural issues. They're issues at the level of fact. When we come to definitional stasis, here our next point, definitional stasis, this is a question about how we should define or interpret the facts. So we can see here that if we concede at the level of conjecture or fact, you hit me, and the other person says, I did, then we don't necessarily end the argument. We're not necessarily out of the controversy. In fact, I would say most controversies actually exist at these levels. If your controversy just exists at this level, it's kind of boring, I would say. It could be very heated. Maybe the kind of flat earth debate, if you're interested in that, that's still kind of going on in some corners of the internet, is really about a question about what are the facts and trying to establish these facts. But to me, they seem, once something's a fact, usually it's been pretty well established. So that's not where most of the interesting stuff happens in public controversy. Usually it happens here. So how do we interpret things that are happening? You hit me, I did. Someone says that's assault, and the other party says that's self-defense. So then the descriptions of this act of violence, how we should understand it, how we should interpret it, what are other examples that are similar to it? Things like this would be at definitional stasis. Sometimes I think people are inclined to see definitional stasis as being merely semantic. I think this is very wrong. There are very serious and important issues that relate to how we define or understand things. Obviously, right now, there's the situation that's happening in Israel. And I say situation not to be lacking candor with you, but because that's exactly my point. What should we call what is happening there? Is it a war? Is it a genocide? Is it an act of self-defense? These are obviously highly contentious issues, and how people relate to what's happening in the Middle East has a lot to do with how they define it. This is not a not serious issue at all, and there's a great deal of serious legal, historical, juridical, moral, ethical argumentation that goes into arguments at the level of definitional stasis. So sometimes things might be at the level of quality, let's say, where someone's like, I think this is safe. I believe that organic food is safe, or I believe that GMOs are safe. And someone else might question that, be like, well, what do you mean by safe? So we might move from one level where we think we're pretty secure, and we kind of come back to definitional stasis, because we can always question the use or the meaning of a particular term that's being used in an argument. So what we're looking for here in our own controversies are places where there's a major set of disagreements about particular terms or descriptions or interpretations that are very relevant to the public controversy at hand. When we get to quality, these are questions about what's good or bad, what's just or unjust. So you hit me, I did. That's assault. Yes, it is. That's wrong. You deserved it. I don't necessarily say this is how you should conduct your interpersonal affairs. Probably not a good idea to go with that argument. But you can imagine a situation in which, in fact, it's not hard to imagine it. It's going on right now in the world in many different areas, where someone's saying the violence that I'm enacting against you is deserved. It is justified. And this is an argument that can happen in lots of different cases. We might talk about things we might disagree about whether privacy rights are being violated. And someone might say, well, you agreed to an end user license agreement. That's just then. That's fair. It's equitable. You made an agreement with a company to use its services. So therefore, it's okay if they sell your privacy data. And someone else might say, well, that's not fair. That's not just, because we have to use these services. It's required for our jobs and for our social fabric. So just having something in an end user license agreement isn't just. It's not fair. So here we have those arguments about the ethical, often is at the level of quality, arguments about justice, arguments about what's good, what's healthy, maybe. Sometimes could be interpreted as a fact, but oftentimes I think it might be better to understand arguments about what's healthy for us at the level of quality. It's those kinds of arguments that are happening there. And then finally, policy or jurisdiction. So this incorporates quite a number of things. This has to do with action, and it has to do with what actions we think we should take in a particular case or particular controversy. It has the question about who has the power or the right to act, who's the best actor in this. Should this be legislation that's happening at the state level or at the federal level? Should this be something that is being done by parents or being done by schools? So questions about who should be the actor are here, or whether even questions about the argument itself. Is this the right time or the place for this argument? Is this argument relevant to what we're talking about? These are questions that maybe fall under this fourth point of stasis of policy or jurisdiction. So to go back to the original one, you hit me, I did. That's assault. Yes, it is. That's wrong. Yes, it is. But then finally we arrive at policy or jurisdiction. You should be punished, and they say you have no jurisdiction. So even if I'm in the wrong all the way through, if you don't have the right power, we might argue at that jurisdictional level, or we might say, I don't know. There might be other arguments that you could make. But that's the very kind of simple example to show you how stasis are arguments that are in contention, and how we can kind of build towards that last point of stasis in our argument as we move through or concede through other ones. So that might give you a sense of what needs to be built up in a particular argument. We might need to establish the facts, the definitions, the values in order to get to that sense of what action is right or appropriate. That doesn't necessarily mean this needs to be the order of your speech, and not every argument or controversy really needs to be argued at all of these levels. Maybe the facts are very clear in your particular controversy. Maybe nobody's arguing there. Maybe there's really no definitional issue in your particular argument. Whatever is the case, that's fine, but you might think about this as a kind of series of matryoshka dolls or nesting dolls that kind of fit within one another in order to build a complete case in a controversy that is public and complex, like the ones we're dealing with. So I want to show you a few other things here using a relatively simple but a modern example of the self-driving car. At the conjectural stasis, people might say self-driving cars reduce auto-related fatalities. Of course, this is only in stasis if there's somebody in the public who argues that it doesn't. And of course, there are people that say this. So what would people appeal to if they defended this proposition? They would probably say something like, hey, look at how many auto-fatalities are caused by human error every year. And I'm making up these statistics, but it's something like 80% of all of these are caused by human error. So if we took the drivers away, we would reduce all of those. So it's an argument based on reasoning. And then opponent might say, hey, look at the actual self-driving cars that we currently have. The number of fatalities per million miles driven is way higher. It's like 100 times more than for these other normal cars. So should we really think that they reduce auto-related fatalities? It seems like they could increase it. We don't have the appropriate technology. So that's something that we might argue about and might appeal to different kinds of evidence or reasoning for. I included a second claim here because I wanted to give you a sense of that future conjectural stasis claim. Self-driving cars will take over the entire auto market. Well, that's not a fact that's already established because we're projecting something into the future, but we might nevertheless use evidence or that's comparative to similar things that happened elsewhere, or projections that people have made that suggest what's most likely to be the case in the future. And of course, this is in stasis because someone might disagree with it. And it's only in stasis if I can actually find an argument in the public where people would disagree with that. And of course, in this particular case, that's not so hard to find. There are many skeptics of self-driving cars saying that they won't take over the entire auto market. In fact, self-driving cars will never reach scale at all. Okay, then definitional stasis. I think for this particular controversy, at least at the level that I'm currently thinking about it, definition isn't majorly important it comes up in a lot, as a subclaim in a lot of arguments, but it's not a major part of it. But I wanted to give you one sense of it. So cruise control is a self-driving feature. Sometimes this comes up in some of the arguments that are being made because people will say, look, we already have self-driving technology in our cars, and that supports this idea that we're already moving towards that. We've all adopted this in. And someone might say, hey, no, it's not self-driving feature, cruise control, because you have to be there for it. You have to set the cruise control. And importantly, you have to be able to turn it off. That is all being done by human judgment. So The fact that there's an autopilot feature is totally distinct from the self-driving technology that's really at issue in this controversy. So that's one example of what definitional stasis might look like. Quality stasis. Self-driving cars are good for the environment. Someone supporting this claim might talk about the need to get to EV or about the greater efficiency of self-driving cars. Someone who opposes this claim might point out all of the data that's necessary for self-driving cars. Huge amount of data, huge amount of electricity and cloud storage necessary for self-driving cars at scale, and that's going to come with an environmental cost. So how do we weigh those up? It would depend on the controversy, but that might be at the level of quality stasis. And finally, policy jurisdiction. The federal government should give subsidies for the development of autonomous vehicle infrastructure. So that would be a proposition that someone might support because they believe that we want self-driving cars, we want them at scale, and we need the correct infrastructure to have that. So who's going to be the best actor to do this? And what's going to be the best action to apply? It's got to be a large actor, the federal government, because similar with the road system we have now, very few people are going to be able to make a profit from maintaining roads. It's kind of it's not a very profitable venture, so we need the government to act here. And subsidies are a good way to do that because some of the technology is still private. People could disagree with this for a lot of reasons, even if they support self-driving cars and self-driving car infrastructure, because they might see that there are better actions to take. They might say, no, it should be all done privately. No subsidies are necessary. Keep the government out of it. The government's going to mess it up. You know, the kind of standard anti-government arguments. Or they might say, no, listen, the federal government should do this actually entirely themselves. They shouldn't rely on private companies at all. So it shouldn't be through subsidies. They should directly build the self-driving car infrastructure. So there's any alternative to a policy or to a way of acting could be a way of opposing it. So you would need to find in the particular controversy what are the alternatives that are being proposed. So now for your own assignment, what you're going to do is go through your topic. So this is just a topic area, right? This is not a proposition. Self-driving cars. It's not a complete sentence. And think about what you might be willing to argue at each of these points of stasis so far. And then say, well, what's the claim that would organize all of these together in my speech? And then you might highlight that claim and say, well, this is what I'm going to give my speech about. This is not what I'm going to give my speech about because I don't agree with this. But you would be able to organize all of your claims through stasis. What are the claims that are in stasis that are going to be important for me to argue about in my speech, and what is the main claim that I'm going to say is my position for the speech? The claim that I'm defending, that all of the other claims are support for. My guess is that you should probably have your main claim be at this point of stasis, given that this is a public controversy, which has to do with attitudes, norms, or laws. It's probably going to be at this level, but it might not be. It's possible you could be arguing here for your whole position, or even here, or possibly here. Maybe. We'll see. But you want to think about all of the potential claims that might come up in your speech. And you can do that in one way, through stasis.